Well, hey everybody, this is Brad Dyke saying hi, how you doing? Let me take my granny glasses off here. Reaching out to you. Sometimes it's really difficult to identify some of these cards. Manufacturers want to sell it to you, but they sure as heck don't want to support it, you know what I mean? Anyways, so this video today is about hardware attributes, but on a different scale. About a year or two ago, I did a discussion about an environment, and in this case, let me show you. Right down there is an HVAC unit. An HVAC unit is basically designed to provide cooling power. That's right. This is kind of like HVAC in a very similar way. You have basically a compressor set. In this case, we use heat as the compressor, but you can have a motor like an air conditioning unit has. And of course, you've got the exchange, and the exchange process can either produce cold or it can produce heat. Now, if you have an HVAC solution that is an air conditioner, then that's great, except it doesn't help you during the winter time. So what you really truly need is one of these. We call them heat pumps. And the unit I have down here is a heat pump. So we're going to talk about a modern update of what does it mean. I've got both small stuff, like if you look over here, I've got these little 4000 series, and I've got my pies and all of that there. But cooling and heating are an attribute and a trick as well as a fine art. Let me explain. Like I said, a heat pump can either move heat to the coil and send it out the back, or it can pull heat from the coil and put it back down on the target if it is too cold. Yes, electronics could get too cold. Now, the key thing about electronics is, if you notice in this room, I have a LCD display here for the big view stuff. I've got consoles, display screens, and everything else in this lab environment. And contrary to popular belief about keeping your CPU cool, it is not good for condensation to take effect on your gear. And that happens when you have high humidity and you've got coolness. So you've got to take care of the humidity, and you've got to take care of the temperature range that could produce water, which is very bad for electronics. So with that being said, let's talk about it. So the first thing we have to understand is that in this environment, we have in the back here, if you look, you will see a hose, a set of hoses here. And these hoses is an exchange and a cooling unit. Now, one brings in cool air to help with the compressor so it doesn't get too hot, and it exports excess heat. The second one is an exchange value that it's used to mix with the air to take advantage of pre-existing temperature values as well. But the exchange and the exit airflow vents are two very critical vents, because that allows the heat pump to do what it does. Now, the heat pump's functionality is based on the principle of funneling the heat correctly from the source of the heat here, like from hard drives and so on, funnel it out, get it to the back, the exchange back here. If you look, I actually separated the exchange way down there. I basically took it off. It's just sitting on the floor there, and there is the open exchange, and it's sucking the hot air out from here. Now, the more optimal solution here is I should have ran a pipe up high where heat likes to travel and had it up there, staying up there, sucking the heat from there back down. But I didn't want to do that because I can keep the ambient rate of the room comfortable for me as well, which is, it's not exactly the most comfortable thing in the world to be inside a cooled environment. But the cooling air effect of this guy creates what's called a circulation effect. You've also heard me say the term convection effect. It blows across the room out to that wall. mixing the air intake and then bringing the air back around and then back down to here. Sometimes I do take that extension nozzle and I'll put it up high when I know I'm going to have a lot of gear online, because this unit is flexible. But this is a heat pump, and it's a very good heat pump. I've had it for a couple of years now. You can't buy it anymore, but it is very basically functionalized. It can dehumidify the air for me. It can regulate temperature in an automatic state, or I can have it run cold, or I can have it run hot. And with that, it gives me the ability of being able to keep everything in a good place. Now, with that being said, the other thing that you have to do is consider the room itself. Now, a few of you come back and said they like this video. It's, the video I made for this very particular thing, and it was very productive and functional for what they wanted. They were discussing things like wood and closing into a closet and stuff like that. Well, let me give you a piece of advice. If you're going to put it inside your house, then make sure there's 3 feet of clearance from your enclosure, like you see back here. Many of my counterparts out there who have a rack or a half rack know that if you have that space on the sides of the racks, then you can effectively convect air the right way. Now, when you put it into a closet, it seems like it's a great idea. You might even put an exhaust output in the back area. But the problem is, you got to remember one very important detail. Everything absorbs heat, which means your ambient level around you has heat in it. What happens when you put a pan on an oven? It gets warm. And you put food inside the pan and you cook the pan, and then you take that pan and you set it aside. Now, if you put that pan just to the side of the heating element, and you put another pan on the heating element, and you start cooking with the second pan, you go back to grab the pan that you first worked with, because you're going to wash it now, and you realize it's warm, but it's been off the element for quite a while. Why is it still warm? Because it's metal. And everything, including mortar, plaster, drywall, everything absorbs heat. And when you put something into a closet, you really do confine the value of the air, and or you create what's called a pressure induction effect, where you can't quite move the air correctly. It seems to be stovepiped, or just not flowing right. I mean, some of the air is moving, some of it's not, it's stagnant and so on. And that's because you most likely have created what's called multiple convection effects. And that means you might have 2 or 3 or even 4, and the air is exchanging, but it's exchanging with pockets of air until it finally can get to the proper vent and be sent out to be, removed from the area. The result is your heat, it stays around, and you don't have a radiator, so the substances around your enclosure setup begin to absorb the heat. So what ends up happening is you always have a warm environment. And it's not necessarily that bad for your computer systems, but it's not great either. So my recommendation is, as you can see here, I use a reflective surface here for RF control, and it's grounded, but it also doesn't hold heat. So when my racks get warm, just the racks get warm, and that's it. Nothing, not even the tools in this room, and not even the heat sinks in this room get warm. They're cold. That's what I want. I want a clear-cut convection effect that goes around and back to the same source so that the airflow is properly regulated. Now, you've also heard me make the statement of, does the room matter? Yes, it does. This is a garage room. And why is that so important? Because it has a really super awesome value to it. Concrete. That's right. Down on the floor, it's concrete. What's so important about concrete? Concrete, indoor-wise, will always maintain the temperature around 50 degrees, which means it's also a heater as well as a cooler. And by allowing the room to have concrete as its foundation, if you've ever felt the coolness when you walk into a concrete room, it's always to about 3 feet. The air above is mixing with that air below, and it allows you to mix the air naturally, just like outside. So that allows you to have what's called a strike zone, or an optimal exchange place between the hottest and the coldest. And if you notice there on this particular guy right down here, its vent is pointing right about here. And it blows cool air here. And it exchanges equally, pushing the cool air from the ground up with it and making the hot air exchange with the lower level. Now, basements are good, but you gotta have to have a dehumidifier. Gotta be careful with basements. They have their problem. And concrete absorbs water. So it's important to dehumidify your air. Too much moisture in the air runs the risk of condensation. Plus, high humidity in the air is an impactor on the ability of exchanging heat, cold to hot. Now you can't get crazy and go to 2 or 3 or 20%, humidity. You can't do that. It's going to be almost impossible because every other location has air in it, and that air is moisture. So if you get too much, then you start generating the opposite problem you have for electronics, and that is static electricity discharges, because too least amount of humidity causes you to easily produce static discharges. So you really have to be super careful about the nature of cooling if you're going to go to the next level. Now, with that being said, you got to ask the other question. Well, couldn't I just go with a really small footprint? Get myself a little tiny lab. I could put my little drawer somewhere in my desk, or something like that. Sure, you can. Why not? I have all 4 of them. I have the heavy high cores, multi-cores. I've got the standard 2Us. I've got the 1Us. I've got the Pis. I've got the mini PCs. I've got it all because I'm testing all. So if you want to take your old rack and change it into a small little, I can get it all in one PC tower case. Sure, go ahead. But remember, they also have cooling requirements. And I've never been a fan of liquid cooling because of the nature of liquid cooling and the difficulty of taking care of things and the ease of potentially frying your gear. But I am a fan of TEDs. TEDs are really cool. They're thermoelectric diodes. I have one here. Let me see if I can reach over and grab one real fast. And well, unfortunately, I don't have it here, but I have TEDs, and you can put them on top of each other. And the thing about a thermoelectric diode is it's a heat pump, too. Basically, what it does is you put it between a way of dissipating heat, like this heatsink, and you put 2 or 3 of these on that, and they carry a 5-volt or a 12-volt load, and they use electricity to pump the heat off the processor. Some of the more complicated processors out there that exist have TEDs built into the metal housing that's on top of them. That's kind of an interesting detail. So TEDs are very valuable, and they can do quite a bit in sucking out the heat. Now, the complication with that is you're using electrical energy to pump heat through, and that does have an effect. And it has a side effect of the energy discharging effect with the positive to negative. So you have to be careful. You can't put 30 of these on top of each other, because then you're creating something you don't want to deal with. Not on the computer. You're wondering, what's that interference? Where's all that coming from? That's coming from the TEDs. So with that being said, there's nothing wrong with having a tiny little setup and trying to minimize everything and work on ARMS processors as opposed to AMDs or Intel Xeons. Like I said, I do all of it. I have it all here in my 2 racks. As a matter of fact, there's only one person I know in the industry that has 2 full racks back behind him, and he's over in, I think, Deutschland somewhere. And he's a very competent individual, and I think he even put some type of device, some type of server environment thing set up in a tank that was underground. More power to you, dude. It looks like it's fun. I probably won't do that myself. The ground's a little hard here in Ohio. But anyways, point is that when you're doing this kind of design work and your implementation, you have to understand the nature of what you're trying to accomplish. And that is optimal cost-effective cooling, regardless if it's small or if it's big. So with that being said, I hope this is something you guys would like. I wanted to do a little bit of a technical refresh, explain the nature of the heat pump that I use and why heat pumps are more valuable as an overall heating and cooling solution, because you can't really work in a frigid environment. You have to work in an optimal capacity, and you can do that pretty effectively. And you also do what we call phasing. In other words, you're only bringing up a third of it up at a time. I never run more than 1/4 or 1/8 of this rack or the other rack at one time, because obviously I don't want to have a lot of electrical current expense for running such a complicated hardware. But I have got quite a few projects coming up that will require that I do some rebuilding and getting this environment to a more optimal footprint going forward. Well, this is Brad Dyke. I hope you guys enjoyed this. God bless, and please have a great weekend, and you guys take care. Bye-bye.